gentlemen, I'm Shadow Stevens. This is the Mark Thompson Show. Keep it to yourself.
Yep, that's right. It is the Mark Thompson Show. Thank you so much for joining us. I had to come on and talk immediately about what happened. Hi, Mark Thompson. Oh, wait,
Cam,
I'm
hello.
messing it up all over the place. Listen, this isn't what has normally happened this week. This is a total mistake. Okay,
You want
total
to
mistake.
just it has a loop thing on it. You want if you have that clicked, then it will continue to loop.
I fixed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, very good.
So today you're floating off the coast of Lima, Peru, somewhere.
Yeah, we're on our way to South America. That's exactly right. We're on our way to further south.
And I see this headline. The headline is that Colorado Supreme Court removes Trump from the state's 2024 ballot. So I text you, and we've been going back and forth. And let me tell you how I feel about it.
Yeah, we've been disagreeing on this. So go ahead, please.
I feel like there is this portion, this clause of the 14th Amendment for a reason. It is not willy-nilly that the founders wrote the Constitution. They didn't just put stuff in there to put stuff in. And what you have is proof, I believe, that Trump stirred up this insurrection. Even as late as yesterday, there was word that people were keeping it quiet, that he had actually been contacting people that were involved in the insurrection. So I think there's proof that he stirred up this insurrection. And even if there wasn't, we have it on videotape of him, nearby or wherever he was at the Capitol that day, and his words are enough for me. So to me, they're upholding the flavor and the letter of the law.
So this was a constitutional provision that was put in after the Civil War, as you're aware. Mm-hmm. And it was during a time where there obviously we had a civil war. There were those dug in on either side and legit insurrectionists. And I'm not even arguing that Trump himself isn't a legit insurrectionist. I'm not arguing at all that Trump isn't deserving of being given the boot on some level. But what I am very concerned with, and I feel it's a huge mistake, is this entire emergency escape hatch that allows you to erase candidates from the ballot. It will be yet another way that our system, flawed as it's incredibly been, I mean, the Electoral College being the front and center flaw of our electoral system for president, I'm talking about, it'll be yet another way that the system becomes flawed. This is going to become the new way to pursue political ends by erasing from the ballot candidates that you're not happy with. And so, again, you know me on Donald Trump. Don't want him anywhere near the White House, even on a tour. But the fact is, this is, in my view, a very, very dangerous precedent. Now, to the merits of it, many may say in defense of Trump, well, he was never convicted of anything. He's never really been charged with anything. Well, the reality is the stipulation in the Constitution is such that you don't actually have to be convicted of anything, which makes it even, in a sense, more dangerous. You can say, what do you mean? Like, look at what Kim's just said. I mean, we've got evidence. The history around January 6th is replete with evidence that Trump may have stirred it up and actually fomented it. Okay, but what I would say,
replete and fomented, double ding, right there.
Okay, double ding, and what I would say is, well, I can argue the other side of that. I can argue that Trump was just pursuing his First Amendment rights. He was wrong not to stop it. And he might have been wrong to foment it, don't get me wrong, but I'm just talking about the legal side of it. And so you begin this tug of war over what the actual specifics are on any one candidate. And so let's think beyond Trump now. Let's think beyond Trump. And the fact is that beyond Trump, you can build whatever case you want for whatever candidate you want off the ballot. And then finally, let me go to the practical. From a practical standpoint, Trump is not going to win Colorado anyway, so this doesn't matter. And in the states that it does matter, you'll never get him off the ballot. You're not going to get him off the ballot in South Carolina. So this is going to become a thing. It's going to be the new game where you remove candidates that weren't going to win. You could remove them from the state of California, for example. It's not going to matter. It's not going to win California. And a GOP candidate is not going to win California for president. So you see how this is going to become yet another game that is played. And I think it's going to be played by the major political parties in ways that will further denigrate the political system. That's where I am.
So let's roll back for just a moment, because I feel like when you say it's just going to become the new political tool, well, I can see that with the impeachment, because you can start an impeachment inquiry for someone for anything. But to incite an insurrection has to be pretty specific. So that you would say that this could then be used as a tool down the line seems a little bit, I don't know.
Does it or doesn't it? Can't I?
It seems beyond, because you would have to have another insurrection. I mean, how often does that happen?
No, you can. I can say that you were involved in attempts at insurrection based on your podcast. If I wanted to, I could say that your podcast has fomented enough unrest and has created enough doubt that it's undermined the confidence in the government of the United States of America, and therefore you are an insurrectionist, and therefore you should be removed from the ballot. You see how, you're interpreting it in a very strict way, perhaps, but you can begin to broaden the interpretation, and this is what autocrats do. This is what the beginning of making the law, and I use it in sort of air quotes, work for you, does. And in so doing, you undermine the political system. Again, I remind you, I'm not a fan of Trump. I want him nowhere near Washington. I want him nowhere near the presidency. But I know something like this can really be a genie that you cannot get back into the bottle.
Okay, so if that's the case, then I'll ask the question, and I'm bringing in the big guns tonight on the Mark Thompson Show. If that's the case, then why even have the law or have this be a clause in the Constitution at all? I welcome to the Mark Thompson Show David Cay Johnston, everybody. Pulitzer Prize winning author, amazing all-around person.
This is extraordinary. Wow.
David Katz, we're bringing the Davids in. They're going to get it.
Oh, my God.
Hi,
hello,
boys.
everyone.
How are you?
Wow. Hi there. Hi, David. It's really an honor to be on with you both.
Let me start with David Katz, the former federal prosecutor. You've got a background in the law. Tell me, if you could, look at what's happened today. Do you think this has any merit going toward the Supreme Court? Is it going to stick?
Well, first, let me say that I've been a fan of David Cay Johnston for a long time, and this is the first time I've actually been on a split screen with you, and it's really a delight. And of course, to be with you, Mark, somewhere off the coast of South America, and Kim, my old friend from the Pat Thurston Show. I was just on her show 10 minutes ago,
Awesome.
KCBS in the Bay Area.
That's awesome.
I think that the U.S. Supreme Court is going to take cert of this case, certiorari, and I think they're going to reverse it fairly summarily, saying that it's a political question. I'm not sure that that is what they ought to do under Colorado law and the U.S. Constitution 14th Amendment, because I think it actually is on solid ground. And if I could just go into that for 1 minute, the only reason that the trial court in Colorado didn't rule as the Colorado Supreme Court just did is because a lot of people think that judge kind of copped out, saying that Trump was not an officer of the United States. The Constitution 14th Amendment doesn't call out the president as one of the offices that an insurrectionist is disqualified on account of the insurrection. But people say it cannot be the intent of the Civil War Congress and the people who went to all the trouble to pass the 14th Amendment and amend the Constitution to allow Jefferson Davis to become the president of the United States, to allow Robert E. Lee to run for the presidency of the United States in 1870. That cannot have been the intent. It was obvious that they meant to cover the office of the president if the president was one of the people who participated in insurrection. And so what they did was they called out the minor officers to make sure that it was including these minor officers. But of course, the president was covered. The Colorado Supreme Court just ruled 4-3. What I just said is the law, that in fact, the Constitution includes the president. As to the rest of it, the trial court had held a trial. They had given Trump due process. They'd allowed the lawyers to argue and present evidence that he had not participated in the insurrection. And the trial court had found, based on the evidence and the law, that he had participated in the insurrection. Big surprise. We saw him incite the insurrection. We saw the inflammatory speeches. We saw him bring his followers to Washington. Let's be wild. We saw him not tamp down the insurrection while it was going on, marauding in the Capitol for 3.5 hours. And in fact, to send a very an inflammatory email about Pence while Pence was being menaced with being hanged in the U.S. Capitol. So the court found that there had been this insurrection, that Trump had participated in it. They found that after due process. They found he was an officer covered by the 14th Amendment. And there it was. I understand your concern that someone could say about a Democrat or some president in the future that they had participated in insurrection by supporting Black Lives Matter demonstrations, or they had participated in the insurrection by not tamping down those nights of violence in Portland, Oregon. But I do kind of agree with Kim, and then I'll shut up. I kind of agree with Kim that while they could be invented and made up as to future people running for president, this one is real. This one is so genuine. This one is so factually based. They were marauding at the U.S. Capitol, just the sort of thing the insurrectionists would have done during the Civil War.
I'll take it over to you, David Cay Johnston, as I bring Michael Shure onto the broadcast as well. Oh, look at all the people on the screen. Let's see what you have to say about this, David Cay Johnston, your thoughts.
Well, I was reading the dissent while David Katz was talking, the dissents. I think it's very important to understand that there is no execution method, not killing people, but how to carry out the law provision in the 14th Amendment. It doesn't say after a judicial proceeding or anything else. And David Katz is exactly right. You cannot imagine that the court, that the Congress meant to say in the 14th Amendment, oh, by the way, Jefferson Davis, he can run for president. Robert E. Lee, he can run for president. Clearly, they understood that they were barring things like that unless large supermajorities of Congress granted waivers, in effect, granted forgiveness. You do not need to engage in insurrection to be denied the ballot. The 14th Amendment in Section 3 says insurrection or rebellion or give aid or comfort. Well, Donald Trump did nothing for 187 minutes, more than 3 hours. There's testimony that he sat there saying, isn't this great? Isn't this wonderful? He gave aid and he gave comfort. Interestingly, the court doesn't go into that because the people who brought the case, who are, by the way, all Republicans and one independent. There are no Democrats in this case. Republicans and independents, and an independent brought this case. They framed it in terms of committing insurrection. I don't know what the Supreme Court will do. Given that the Constitution says that states will determine their elections unless Congress passes a law that is takes over, I don't think the Supreme Court has any more business hearing this case than it did hearing the case of Gore v. Bush, which should have been decided solely by the Florida Supreme Court under that part of the Constitution.
Now, that's interesting. I don't mean to, but you know, David Katz, we're going to throw it back to you for a moment. That's a really interesting point that David Cay Johnston's making. He's saying the Supreme Court shouldn't even hear this. Could you speak to that?
Well, there is an issue legally whether there's a federal question. Trump's going to say that he has some kind of federal right to run in every state in the union. But the counter to that is that, and people aren't used to it because we're used to the blue and the red board that appears on national TV. And people are all saying, well, what do we even need an electoral college for? We should get rid of the electoral college, but we haven't. We vote state by state, and states are allowed to set their own terms and conditions of voting. It's very, very irksome, isn't it, when that happens with one of these southern states that's denying the vote to Black people, that's gerrymandering and all that sort of thing. But the reality is that you start with the idea that the states do control their own processes unless there's some federal constitutional right that makes the state give way. And the argument's going to be that this was done completely properly under Colorado law. There was a trial, there was due process, there was no violation of the federal Constitution anyway here. And so you have...
Okay, you got me. The phone works. It's not right at the moment because my wife and I are both on it. But call me back on this number in, 50 minutes, okay?
You may want to mute
right.
David for the moment.
Yeah,
okay, but go ahead,
Sorry.
David.
Where were we, Mark?
David Katz. Yeah, so you were saying that it's a state, that the states control their own destiny in terms of, it may not be a pretty thing, but you're saying the states control the way that they...
And the U.S. Supreme Court, could say that in this case, just like they could have said it in Bush v. Gore and let Florida decide its own processes for recounting the Florida vote in that state. But if you're betting If you're betting, bet on the U.S. Supreme Court with the 2 arch conservatives and the 3 acting as sort of lackeys for Trump, that there are 5 votes there. And they might even get Roberts on this one. And maybe, Mark, because the moderates and liberals on the court are so worried about this as a precedent, and they realize they're going to lose anyway, this might actually be unanimous. I don't think so. There's no way it's unanimous the other way, because Alito and Thomas want to take this case desperately and do something with it. They'll probably dissent if they turn down cert. It only covers Colorado law, but obviously, Mark, this would be a huge incentive, right, to the other states, to swing states like Pennsylvania, where it'd make a huge difference for them to proceed, and for the judges to not be, in my view, kind of timid so far, saying in state after state it's a political question, saying that, we see the argument, but we're not going to do it, saying that the president's not an officer. So it would only technically cover Colorado law, but it would be, I think already it's going to have political momentum. I'd like to hear what the others have to say. But
just on that point.
I think it's going to help Nikki Haley right now.
Right. Michael Shure, I want to talk to you about that, because I was making the point before everybody joined that I felt that this is, in a way, just from a practical standpoint, in a state that isn't particularly a swing state. I think it's a foregone conclusion. This becomes just another political vehicle that can be manipulated and used in red states against blue candidates and blue states against red candidates. That was my general argument. But what I'm asking you, since you've just come back from a Trump rally, is what you're covering a Trump rally. I want to make that clear.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the clarity.
But what are the political realities of something like this? How does this? Yeah.
The political realities are it's too early to tell, right? I mean, everybody, and I think we all know this, sort of processes things through the prism of politics now. So whenever you have a ruling like this, or whenever there is a court that is acting, what's the first thing people say? Who appointed these judges, right? What party are these judges with? Who was the governor when these judges? Well, it turns out all 7 were Democrats. But I say this only because this is the way that we look at things right now. And then what do we do? The way I think, because my mind is trained this way, is Neil Gorsuch is the son of Colorado. Maybe he'll want to defer to Colorado. Maybe there's more to this than we were thinking. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not even a legal expert. But when you look at this through the eyes of politics, and I've spent a lot of time on the road now with Trump supporters, I mean, really since 2015, but acutely recently as well, is that you see that they are pointing to how haphazard things are on the other side. And just this conversation that the Davids are having tells you that you see that, you have a ruling like this, you start thinking, well, this is a state law, but it's a federal constitution. How does the state prosecute on the U.S. Constitution rather than on the state constitution? All of these things muddy the water, and they, on the other side, the Trump supporters will look at this as, everything is haphazard, everything's a mess. They're grasping at straws constantly just because they don't want Donald Trump to run. So the political ramifications, I would guess, are going to make Trump a victim in some way. And I think that reversing this decision, if the Supreme Court does it, is actually going to make many Democrats breathe a sigh of relief. But this is sort of like, going to breaking news, reporting exactly what happened when the plane crashed, but not really knowing what happened. So it is probably too soon to say exactly what happened, or what will happen, and how this is going to be digested politically. But everything is political now.
Yeah, David Cay Johnston. It's interesting because the truth is, David Cay Johnston, that, and you've reported, you've written about this chapter and verse literally in all your books on Trump. I mean, he plays the victim card so well. Does this help amplify that sort of message that he wants to communicate?
Oh, yes. Donald will use this to try and build support and find people who might be on the edge to go for him. But the Constitution, as one justice observed, is not a suicide pact. And to allow someone who sought to overthrow the government and who has publicly declared his intent to be a dictator for one day, as we all know, dictators willingly give up their power, it is a suicide pact. Now, the Supreme Court is not going to look strictly to the law here. I agree with Michael and David Katz that we live in a world where politics are going to play an enormous part in this decision. But what happens when someone wants to say, we're going to ignore the Second Amendment? We're going to ignore any other amendment. How about the 13th Amendment? I wonder how Clarence Thomas would feel about that. We'll ignore the 13th Amendment, which prohibits slavery. So we need, it's not going to happen, but we really need to focus on principles. Now, the decision of the majority in the Colorado Supreme Court, I think, is well argued. Their fundamental argument is that it is ridiculous that Donald Trump's claim he wasn't an officer of the United States, and that the Article 3 of the 14th Amendment is self-executing. One of the dissents says, well, no, if Congress actually wanted to execute this, they would put in a provision requiring it. Lo and behold, you can be charged with insurrection. But it doesn't say in the 14th Amendment, people convicted of insurrection or rebellion. It says those who participated. And as I emphasized, and I hope in the Supreme Court that the Solicitor General who's going to be involved in this makes this point, all you have to do is give aid or comfort. That's all it takes, aid or comfort.
What bothers me is that the argument against doing this is, oh, it can be a political tool. But I'm left scratching my head at is, well, who gets to decide then which parts of the Constitution to enforce and which parts not to enforce? There's a reason that it's in there.
Well, even the dissenters in the Colorado case, at least the first two dissents, I've only read the first two, they seem to be very clear that if the issue was Donald Trump is not yet 35 years old, or he is not a natural-born citizen, that would be a wholly different matter. And the state of Colorado could decide that because it's pretty easy to establish that through things like birth records or announcements in the Honolulu newspapers in June of 1961 in the case of Obama. But I don't see how this is any more complicated than establishing the other qualifications to be president. Natural born citizen, 35 years old, 14 years resident of the country. And yes, there's going to be a big political kickback. Yes, somebody will try to do other things in the future. We're dealing with the instant case. We're not dealing with what might happen down the road. If that's the case, a long time ago, we would have dealt with the prospect of Donald Trump calling for the overthrow of the government, the murder of his vice president, not moving him to do anything. And that's not how the law works. The law applies after the fact. We have decisions and things that say these are the rules, but application occurs after the fact. We don't say, oh, Mark Thompson, we know you're going to kill somebody on, like the movie Minority Report, on August 7th of next year. We're going to arrest you today. That's not how it works.
I have a question, and that is, if Colorado's ruling today stands with the Supreme Court, we talked a little bit about other states then waiting to see what happens and then following suit. And Mark was saying to me earlier, well, then it'll only be blue states that this happens in. Then maybe California will follow suit, but these are all the states that Trump would not have taken anyway. But I wonder if that's really the case. David Katz, I put it to you this way, because anyone can file suit in any state. And then these cases wind through the court process. And so it could be that even in a red state, he gets wiped off the ballot.
Well, the reason that the Colorado case is kind of a jewel is because they gave Trump due process. They had a trial, the court made findings. This is how our due process and how our legal system works. So the people who ran straight to a Supreme Court in a state, or the people who maybe haven't observed the time limits in a state, they may be out. But I believe that if the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, stays its hand, denies cert on this case, of course, only the Colorado law will go into effect because that's state law. But I do think it will embolden people in other states. They will go into swing states if it's still timely for them to do so. They may start doing this in the next few days and follow the Colorado pattern. Ask for a trial, give Trump a chance to defend himself at a trial, afford him due process. And that really would matter in a state like Pennsylvania, in a swing state like that, if they're still timely. So I'm expecting two things to happen, just my sort of political radar, such as it is. Number one, I think there'll be more actions brought in more states, including more swingy states than Colorado. And also, I do think, and I would like to hear from your political expert on this, I think this has to help Nikki Haley. There have to be some people in the Republican Party who not only see her way ahead in the polls, ahead of Biden while it's close with Biden and Trump, but who see here's a candidate, right, who is not under any challenges at all. She's not going to be the defendant in chief. She looks like a commander in chief. And I think that at some point they'll say this is just too risky. This is too risky because he might get thrown off the ballot in one of these states that matters. And with that, we'll go the election. And the Democrats may not want to win ugly, but believe me, the Democrats want to win, whether we think it's a little ugly or not, whether we think it's a little formalistic or not. And again, I don't think it's formalistic. I think this is a good case under the Constitution and under Colorado law. But I think the U.S. Supreme Court, my bet is that they will reverse it anyway.
This is interesting because, Dave, we'll wrap up here. But, guys, I do want to get from Michael Shure what David was talking about. David Cay Johnston talks about this, that Trump is, has to show up to court. He's in and out of court between rallies, and that at some point that becomes an encumbrance. I know he's made that point before. Michael, what are the realities concerning Nikki Haley, who is, clean of all of this stuff, and Trump, to David Katz's question?
Well, even in these moments, you're starting to see what and it is a good question. It's one of those things where, I'm not escaping answering it, but it's one of those things that we don't quite know. Vivek Ramaswamy today, in echoing the way that people behave around Donald Trump and the Republican Party, saying that he's outraged by it. He will take himself off the ballot in Colorado if this stands. So there is still, they are all aware that an adherence to Donald Trump and a protection of Donald Trump has political currency, certainly in these early states and certainly with a lot of the Republicans. Again, I've spent a lot of time recently in Iowa, and all of the Republicans there, Trump is over 50%. They're not looking right now at these other people in a serious way, though they should be, because what David Katz just said is true, is that these people are out there now and doing well. Nikki Haley is coming up in the polls, juxtaposed to this mess. They don't want this mess, yet we've been waiting for something to have that change, right? If this is the catalyst for that change, so be it. And I think a lot of people will be happy. But we've been fooled many times before, even with the cumulative difficulties that Donald Trump had, both as a candidate the first time, as a sitting U.S. president, and since. There is nothing that has really disabled him from at least leading that party. And so until it happens, I'm gonna keep betting the favorite here and say that that's not going to happen just yet, not because of this, but some people who bet the underdog do win once in a while, Mark.
David Cay Johnston, it's our last minute.
Mark, can I say one last thing for the people who think it's all
political? And then I want to get a prediction from David Cay Johnston. Go ahead, David Katz.
For the people who think it's all political and not based on law, if there are 7 Democratic members of the Colorado Supreme Court, 3 of the 7 just dissented and voted in a way that would have helped Trump. And that leads me even more to have confidence in the law in the Colorado Supreme Court, the Colorado system, but I'm dubious about the U.S. Supreme Court. If you want a Katzadamus, the U.S. Supreme Court reverses.
Katzadamus is pretty hot these days, but I want to hear from David Cay Johnston also on a prediction. Dave, you think the Supreme Court, you agree with David, will likely overturn this?
Well, the Supreme Court will take the case. That's the first thing. And they have to act very quickly. Apparently, the Colorado Secretary of State says that January 5th, she's got to tell the printer go. So they're going to have to act very quickly. I don't know how they're going to rule on this. It's very important that Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, in the Trump subpoena case said the courts are entitled to everybody's justice. You're not above the law. You're not special. But without a doubt, Thomas and Alito are going to argue the political aspects of this. Gorsuch, whose jurisprudence I don't particularly care for, but who seems to me to be a principled man, I just don't like his view of the world, which I find very inhumane in some cases. He very much is in the corner of, we have to uphold laws. And what Trump is effectively arguing here is that the state of Colorado can't exercise its own powers over its electors to determine that someone has made themselves ineligible under the 14th Amendment. That's not a minor issue to address. So I'd be shocked if there's a unanimous decision on this case, but the court being what it is today, probably Trump will prevail at the court.
I want to thank this late night
Yeah.
convening of these sagacious creatures. Very, very impressive. It's so good to see you all. Kim, this is to your credit, because you put up the bat beam, and we have all these great guys show up. Thanks,
I know. I'm telling you,
David
bringing
Cay
the
Johnston,
big
David
guns.
Katz, Michael Shure. Thank you, and good night from off the coast of South America. And thank you, Kim.
See ya.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
All right. See you guys. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.